I don't know if you can hear it on the microphone. I don't know if the microphone is picking that up or not, but she's back there and she is whining. She is meowing and she wants out of that room and it is annoying. It is annoying. Okay, moving on. More clean and unclean. Oh, and by the way, the purpose of all these instructions, as he says here in the last verse of the chapter. You must distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between living creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. But that is a major point to these teachings, to distinguish between the clean and the unclean, the holy and the common. And they're to be clean, they are to be holy, they're to be consecrated and set apart. This is a physical example of a spiritual truth, as the entire Old Testament is. Through constant use of applying the scriptures, studying the scriptures, and applying them, as we find out in the New Testament, we are to learn to distinguish between good and evil. And here they're being taught the difference between clean and unclean. So ultimately, these are lessons that are being used to teach the Israelites the difference between clean and unclean, and by extension, all of God's people who come to Him in the centuries to come. Okay, moving on. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, a woman who becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her monthly period." Blood makes things unclean. Blood and bodily discharge make things unclean. On the 8th day, the boy is to be circumcised, and the mother would be involved with that. Women, of course, aren't circumcised, but they are involved in the circumcision of their sons. So they're part of the covenant, a sign of circumcision via being involved in their son's circumcision when their sons are 8 days old. Then the woman must wait 33 days to be purified from her bleeding. She must not touch anything sacred or go to the sanctuary until the days of her purification are over. If she gives birth to a daughter, for 2 weeks, the woman will be unclean, as during her period, and then she must wait 66 days to be purified from her bleeding. I have no idea why the time limit is doubled for a daughter's birth. No idea. And I believe, honestly, again, it would be presumptuous for any of us to try to speculate on the reason why. The reason why is not given. It's just stated. This is what you're supposed to do. Some people, of course, will take this to mean that this is a sign that women were less valued in the Old Testament. Some people take it as a sign to mean they're more valued. Okay, I don't think we have authority to say anything on that regards, because God does not explain himself here. He just says it as it is, and that's it. And there is no further elaboration in the text anywhere on why that is. When the days of her purification for a son or daughter are over, she, the new mother, is to bring to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or a dove for a sin offering. He shall offer them before the Lord to make atonement for her, and then she'll be ceremonially clean from her flow of blood. These are the regulations for the woman who gives birth to a boy or a girl. If she cannot afford a lamb, she is to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for the sin offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. She's not actually committing a sin by giving birth. Women, of course, were told to do this. We're told to be fruitful and multiply way back at the beginning. But she is bringing another sinner into the world, so it's cause for atonement in that sense. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when anyone, now this is a matter relating specifically to the priests, so Aaron is mentioned here too. This is not just Moses. When anyone has a swelling or a rash or a bright spot on his skin that may become an infectious skin disease, he must be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons who is a priest, just a priest in general. Again, Aaron and his sons are only going to be priests as long as they're alive. So we're really talking about the priesthood as it develops in there in general. The priest is to examine the sore on his skin, and if the hair in the sore has turned white, and the sore appears to be more than skin deep, it is an infectious skin disease. When the priest examines him, he shall pronounce him ceremonially unclean. If the spot on his skin is white, but does not appear to be more than skin deep, and the hair in it has not turned white, The priest is to put the infected person in isolation for 7 days. We've been hearing all about putting sick people in quarantine in the last couple of years now, haven't we? On the 7th day, the priest is to examine him, and if he sees that the sore is unchanged and has not spread in the skin, he is to keep him in isolation another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine him again. And if the sore has faded and has not spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a rash. The man must wash his clothes, and he will be clean. But if the rash does spread in his skin, after he has shown himself to the priest to be pronounced clean, he must appear before the priest again. The priest is to examine him, and if the rash has spread to the skin, he shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious disease. When anyone has an infectious skin disease, he must be brought to the priest. The priest is to examine him, and if there is a white swelling in the skin that has turned the hair white, and if there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic skin disease, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He is not to put him in isolation, because he is already unclean. If the disease breaks out all over his skin, and so far as the priest can see, it covers all the skin of the infected person from head to foot, the priest is to examine him, and if the disease has covered his whole body, he shall pronounce that person clean. Since it has all turned white, he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears on him, he will be unclean. Presumably the raw flesh is growing over the flaky flesh that has dried and peeled off. When the priest sees the raw flesh, he shall pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean. He has an infectious disease. Should the raw flesh change and turn white, he must go to the priest. The priest is to examine him, and if the sores have turned white, the priest shall pronounce the infected person clean. Then he will be clean. I'm going to go ahead and make a new video. Okay, so we're in the middle of these regulations about skin diseases. There are no regulations here about other kinds of diseases, just skin diseases. That's the only thing that we're going to be talking about. Skin diseases and mildew for skin diseases for people, and mildew for fabric and houses and things like that. We're not talking about coughs or colds or anything like that. We're talking about things that can be seen on the skin. But I don't know what kinds of diseases these are. I don't know if we have medical determinations for exactly what kinds of diseases are being talked about here. A lot of times the words, traditionally the word that's been associated with these diseases is leprosy. But this could really be referring to just about any kind of skin disease. When someone has a boil on his skin and it heals, and in the place where the boil was, a white swelling or reddish white spot appears, he must present himself to the priest. The priest is to examine it, and if it appears to be more than skin deep and the hair in it has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease that has broken out where the boil was. But if, when the priest examines it, there is no white hair in it, and it is not more than skin deep and has faded, then the priest is to put him in isolation for 7 days. If it is spreading in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is infectious. But if the spot is unchanged and has not spread, it is only a scar from the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When someone has a burn on his skin, and a reddish white or white spot appears in the raw flesh of the burn, the priest is to examine the spot, and if the hair in it has turned white, and it appears to be more than skin deep, it is an infectious disease that is broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious disease. But if the priest examines it, and there is no more white hair in the spot, and if it is not more than skin deep and has faded, then the priest is to put him in isolation for 7 days. On the 7th day the priest is to examine him, and if it is spreading in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease. If, however, the spot is unchanged, and has not spread in the skin, but has faded, it is a swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scar from the burn. If a man or a woman has a sore on the head or on the chin, the priest is to examine the sore, and if it appears to be more than skin deep, and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the priest shall pronounce that person unclean. It is an itch, an infectious disease of the head or chin. But if, when the priest examines this kind of sore, it does not seem to be more than skin deep, and there is no black hair in it, and they would have all had black hair, by the way. This would have been a dark-haired race of people, generally speaking. Then the priest is to put the infected person in isolation for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine the sore, and if the itch has not spread and there is no yellow hair in it, and it does not appear to be more than skin deep, he must be shaved except for the diseased area, and the priest is to keep him in isolation another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine the itch, and if it has not spread in the skin and appears to be no more than skin deep, the priest shall pronounce him clean. He must wash his clothes, and he will be clean. But if the itch does spread in the skin after he is pronounced clean, the priest is to examine him. And if the itch has spread in the skin, the priest does not need to look for yellow hair. The person is unclean. If, however, in his judgment it is unchanged, and black hair has grown in it, the itch is healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or woman has white spots on the skin, the priest is to examine them, and if the spots are dull white, it is a harmless rash that has broken out on the skin. That person is clean. When a man has lost his hair and is bald, he is clean. That's a big deal to me today because I'm losing my hair at a rapid rate. I'll be bald before you know it. He is clean. If he has lost his hair from the front of his scalp and has a bald forehead, that's definitely me. He is clean. But if he has a reddish white sore on his bald head or forehead, it is an infectious disease breaking out on his head or forehead. The priest is to examine him, and if the swollen sore on his head or forehead is reddish white, like an infectious skin disease, the man is diseased and is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him unclean because of the sore on his head. The person with such an infectious disease, so that anybody who fits into any of these categories we just got done talking about, if you are unclean with an infectious skin disease, here's what you are to do. He must wear torn clothes, let his hair be unkempt, or uncover his head, cover the lower part of his face, and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." As long as he has the infection, he remains unclean. He must live alone. He must live outside the camp. Now, at this point in time, they're still all gathered together in a big camp around the tent of meeting. Eventually, they'll live in their houses and in towns and villages. And even then, they have to live outside the towns and villages, out in the countryside by themselves. They are unclean. So the priests here are to diagnose. The priests here are to diagnose the illness and to pronounce the person clean or unclean and put them in quarantine, essentially, for a period of time to examine it. The priests, however, do not treat the illness. They only diagnose it and pronounce the person to be clean or unclean, depending on the criteria. If any, we'll read about the treatments for these people a little bit later on. But right now we got to get through what to do about rotting materials. Not just diseases on the skin, but what happens when unclean spots break out in your houses. If any clothing is contaminated with mildew, any woolen or linen clothing, any woven or knitted material of linen or wool, any leather or anything made of leather, and if the contamination in the clothing or leather or woven or knitted material or any leather article is greenish or reddish, it is a spreading mildew and must be shown to the priest. The priest is to examine the mildew and isolate the affected article for 7 days. On the 7th day, he is to examine it, and if the mildew has spread in the clothing or the woven or knitted material or the leather, whatever its use, it is a destructive mildew. The article is unclean. He must burn up the clothing or the woven or knitted material or linen or any leather article that has the contamination in it, because the mildew is destructive. The article must be burned up. So here is actually a use of fire as judgment. If it's contaminated with mildew beyond repair, it must be burned up and destroyed. But if, when the priest examines it, the mildew has not spread in the clothing, or the woven or knitted material, or the leather article, he shall order that the contaminated article be washed. Then he is to isolate it for another 7 days. After the affected article has been washed, the priest is to examine it, and if the mildew has not changed its appearance, even though it has not spread, it is unclean. Burn it with fire, whether the mildew has affected one side or the other. If, when the priest examines it, the mildew has faded after the article has been washed, he is to tear the contaminated part out of the clothing, or the leather, or the woven or knitted material. But if it reappears in the clothing, or in the woven or knitted material, or in the leather article, it is spreading. And whatever has the mildew must be burned with fire. The clothing, or the woven or knitted material, or any leather article that has been washed, and is rid of the mildew, must be washed again, and it will be clean. These are the regulations concerning contamination by mildew in woolen or linen clothing, woven or knitted material, or any leather article, for pronouncing them clean or unclean. Now, there may be health benefits here, obviously. We know mold and mildew can be very destructive and harmful. And sometimes you clean them, sometimes you just destroy them. But in the end, while there may be some health benefits to this, that's not the primary purpose for these instructions. The primary purpose of these instructions is to teach the Israelites to separate between the clean and the unclean. The Lord said to Moses, "These are the regulations for the diseased person." So now we're back to the diseased person again. At the time of his ceremonial cleansing. So this is a ceremonial cleansing, okay? And that really ultimately all it is. It's ceremony. These are symbols. These are lessons to be taught, teaching people about deeper spiritual truths. These are the regulations for the diseased person at the time of his ceremonial cleansing, when he is brought to the priest. The priest is to go outside the camp and examine him. If the person has been healed of his infectious skin disease, the priest shall order that 2 live clean birds and some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop be brought for the one to be cleansed. Remember, the priest is not doing the cleansing. The priest is not healing the person from the disease. The priest is diagnosing the disease and sending the person outside the camp, and then checking again to see the progress, and then, of course, conducting the ceremonial cleansing ceremony. But the priest is not actually healing the diseased person. Then the priest shall order that one of the birds be killed over fresh water in a clay pot. He is then to take the live bird and dip it, together with the cedar wood, the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop, into the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water. 7 times he shall sprinkle the one to be cleansed of the infectious disease, and pronounce him clean. Then he is to release the live bird into the open field. So that one bird gets to live. It gets to go back to being a bird. I'm not sure if there's some sort of symbolism there, returning someone to the community like you're returning the bird to his natural habitat. I don't know. The person to be cleansed must wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe with water. Then he'll be ceremonially clean. After this, he may come into the camp. But he must stay outside his tent for 7 days. Remember, they're all living in tents right now, so they still don't have houses yet. On the 7th day, he must shave off all his hair. He did it already a week ago. Now he's got to do it again. His beard, his eyebrows, and the rest of his hair. So everything. He must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day, he must bring 2 male lambs and 1 ewe lamb, a year old, each without defect, along with 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, and 1 log of oil. The priest who pronounces him clean shall present both the one to be cleansed and his offerings before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then the priest is to take one of the male lambs and offer it as a guilt offering, along with a log of oil. He shall wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. He is to slaughter the lamb in the holy place, the sin offering and the burnt offering are slaughtered. Now the word slaughter here is a word used for specifically about killing an animal in ritualistic sacrifice. Just so we know that. We'll mention that again later, but that's a specific term. I don't know what the Hebrew word is behind that. I'll have to look that up. But it is a specific term relating to ritualistic sacrifice. The guilt offering belongs to the priest. It is most holy. The priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot. That's what they did with Aaron and his sons when they first consecrated them. The priest shall then take some of the log of oil, pour it in the palm of his own left hand, dip his right forefinger into the oil in his palm, and with his finger sprinkle some of it before the Lord 7 times. The priest is to put some of the oil remaining in his palm on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot, on top of the blood of the guilt offering. The rest of the oil in his palm the priest shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed and make atonement for him. I guess it was like smeared over his head. Remember, he's freshly shaven. He's completely bald at this point. He doesn't even have eyebrows anymore. So I guess they've smeared all over his head and make atonement for him before the Lord. Then the priest is to sacrifice a sin offering and make atonement for the one to be cleansed from his uncleanness. After that, the priest shall slaughter the burnt offering and offer it on the altar, together with the grain offering, and make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If, however, he is poor and cannot afford these. Now, this is specifically what to do when you've had an infectious skin disease and you're coming back to be cleansed. This is not the same as the various other sacrifices we talked about at the beginning of Leviticus. This is only what happens when you're coming back from being isolated, quarantined, due to an infectious skin disease and being made unclean because of that. If, however, he is poor and cannot afford these, he must take one male lamb as a guilt offering to be waved, to make atonement for him, together with 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour, mixed with oil for a grain offering, a log of oil, and 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, which he can afford, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. On the 8th day he must bring them for his cleansing to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. We're still talking about the poor man here. The poor man who can't afford the male lambs. The priest is to take the lamb for the guilt offering, together with the log of oil, and wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. He shall slaughter the lamb for the guilt offering and take some of its blood and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed. We saw all this earlier. This is just the same thing, just with the poor man instead of a not poor man. On the thumb of his right hand and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest is to pour some of the oil into the palm of his own left hand, and with his right forefinger sprinkle some of the oil from his palm 7 times before the Lord. Some of the oil in his palm he is to put on the same places he put on the blood of the blood of the guilt offering, on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, and the thumb of his right hand, and the big toe of his right foot. The oil of the rest of the oil in his palm the priest shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed, to make atonement for him before the Lord. Then he shall sacrifice the doves or the young pigeons, whichever the person can afford. One is a sin offering, and the other is a burnt offering, together with the grain offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement before the Lord on behalf of the one to be cleansed. These are the regulations for anyone who has an infectious skin disease and who cannot afford the regular offerings for his cleansing. Phew. There's a lot of this stuff. We're getting through it, though. We're getting through it. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When you enter the land of Canaan, which I am giving you as your possession, and I put a spreading mildew in a house." Man, so God is taking credit for the mildew. He's saying, I'm putting that there. "The owner of the house must go and tell the priest, I have seen something that looks like mildew in my house. Now, neither Aaron nor Moses will be there when they are actually in the land in houses. So this is talking about the priests of the generations to come. The priest is to order the house to be emptied before he goes in to examine the mildew, so that nothing in the house will be pronounced unclean. Now, previously, we were talking about mildew on your articles of clothing. They don't have houses at this point in time. Like I said, Moses and Aaron will never get a house in the promised land. But this is pertaining to generations to come when they actually do live in houses in the promised land. After this, the priest is to go in and inspect the house. He is to examine the mildew on the walls, and if it has greenish or reddish depressions that appear to be deeper than the surface of the wall, the priest shall go out the doorway of the house and close it up for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall return to inspect the house. If the mildew has spread on the walls, he is to order that the contaminated stones be torn out and thrown into an unclean place outside the town. So there's that idea again of taking the unclean thing and throwing it outside the community. We saw the infectious skin diseases. People with infectious skin diseases were cast out of the community for 7 days. And here is this idea again of taking the unclean item and casting it out. We're going to read in the Day of Atonement about one of the goats being sacrificed on that day, having the guilt of the nation, not being sacrificed like normal, but having the guilt of the nation be symbolically transferred onto it, and then it's cast out of the community, carrying the sin away from the community. Some of the punishments for sin were being cast out of the community. Some sins were resulted in the death penalty. Some resulted in having to make payment for your crime and make a restitution for it, and then make a sin or guilt offering. And some you were cast out. You were cut off. He must have all the inside walls of the house scraped, and all the material that is scraped off dumped into an unclean place outside the town. Then they are to take other stones to replace these, and take new clay and plaster the house. If the mildew reappears in the house after the stones have been torn out and the house scraped and plastered, the priest is to go and examine it, and if the mildew has spread in the house, it is a destructive mildew. The house is unclean. It must be torn down, its stones, timbers, and all the plaster, and taken out of the town to an unclean place. Anyone who goes into the house while it is closed up will be unclean till evening. Anyone who sleeps or eats in the house must wash his clothes. But if the priest comes to examine it and the mildew has not spread after the house has been plastered, he shall pronounce the house clean because the mildew is gone. To purify the house, he is to take 2 birds and some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop. He shall kill one of the birds over fresh water in a clay pot. Then he is to take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet yarn, and the live bird, dip them into the blood of the dead bird in the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He shall purify the house with the bird's blood, the fresh water, the live bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet yarn. Then he is to release the live bird in the open fields outside the town. In this way he will make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. These are the regulations for any infectious skin disease, for an itch, for mildew in clothing or in a house, and for a swelling, a rash, or a bright spot, to determine when something is clean or unclean. These are the regulations for infectious skin diseases and mildew.